The station hung in the darkness of space like a jeweled crown orbiting the neutral world. Below, Kate Mitchell stood in the arrival bay with her single duffel bag and watched the crowds of aliens moving past her with purpose and confidence. They came in all shapes and sizes. Some had scales that shimmered under the station lights. Others had exoskeletons that clicked and chittered as they walked. A few floated in gravity fields since Earth. Normal gravity was not natural for all species. Kate was the only human in the arrival bay, and every eye turned toward her at some point. She was tall by human standards, but small by the standards of most of the species around her. Her skin was pale from growing up on a world with 3 suns, but heavy cloud cover. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid. She wore the gray uniform of the Coalition with the insignia of a trainee recruit on her shoulders. The other humans had come to the station before her. They had sent back messages describing the wonders and the dangers, but nothing had prepared Kate for the reality of it. The air smelled different, recycled but with undertones of metal and ozone. The light came from sources she could not quite identify. The sounds were constant and varied, in pitch and frequency, in ways that made her ears work harder than they ever had. An older Zanari officer approached her. The Zanari were tall and sleek with 4 arms and skin that looked like burnished bronze. His name was Admiral Vex, and he was the head of the military academy. His eyes moved over Kate with the kind of careful assessment usually reserved for livestock welcome. To the Coalition Academy, he said. His voice was smooth but carried an edge like a blade wrapped in silk. We have waited for the first recruit from the Deathworld Earth. Some of the other training commanders doubted that a human could survive our program. Your species lacks the natural advantages of more established members of our coalition. Kate kept her face neutral. She had grown up listening to her parents talk about the coalition and had studied everything she could find about the other species. Her parents had warned her that there would be prejudice, that some would assume humans were simple or weak. She had prepared for that reality. I am ready to begin training, she said, keeping her voice level and calm. Admiral Vex made a sound that might have been laughter. We shall see if you are ready. We shall see if you are anything more than a curiosity. Led her through the station to the training barracks. The corridors stretched in directions that seemed impossible given the space constraints of a station. Kate realized that the station was larger than any city she had ever visited. It was like walking through a mechanical world where every surface had a purpose. Every wall held conduits and panels. Every corner seemed designed to maximize efficiency. Barracks section assigned to human recruits was small. Only 4 other humans had arrived. Before her, one was an engineer named Maya Torres, who had been born on a colonial world rather than Earth. The other 3 had different jobs and different assignments, but they had all volunteered to come to the Coalition Academy to represent their species. Maya showed Kate to her quarters, a small room with a bed and a workstation. The walls were bare, and the space was efficient but not welcoming. Maya was dark-haired and moved with the ease of someone who had grown up in low-gravity situations. She seemed genuinely glad to see another human who had come directly from Earth. It gets easier, she told Kate. The first few weeks are the hardest. You have to learn how to think differently. You have to understand that every species here has a different way of seeing the universe. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. But most of them think humans are weak because we are fragile. We bruise easily. We need more sleep than most species. We cannot see as far into the spectrum of light. Kate absorbed this information, knowing it was important but also knowing something that the others might not understand. She had grown up on Earth, the same Earth that had produced apex predators and toxic plants and weather systems that could kill without warning, the same Earth where humans had learned to survive on mountains and in deserts and in jungles where every breath was a negotiation with the environment. What they do not understand is that we are built for survival in ways they cannot appreciate. Maya continued as she left Kate to unpack her single bag. Kate sat on the edge of the bed, and looked out the small window at the stars beyond. The constellation patterns were different from the ones she remembered from Earth. Home seemed suddenly very far away. Training began the next day. The academy put Kate and the other recruits through physical tests. The Krillians complained that the obstacles were too simple. The Vorath pointed out that they had not worked up a sweat. The Sithari moved through the course with their natural grace and barely broke rhythm. Kate moved through the obstacle course with focus and control. She was not the fastest. She could not jump as high as the Sithari. She could not lift as much as the Vorath, but she did not stop. She did not slow down. She did not complain. After the physical tests came the tactical simulations. Each recruit worked through scenarios where they had to solve problems under pressure. The aliens around Kate approached these with confidence, believing that their natural abilities would carry them through. The solutions they offered were usually direct and often relied on brute force. Kate approached them differently. She thought about what had always worked on Earth. She thought about survival. She thought about the importance of knowing when to run and when to fight. She thought about the value of patience and observation. Weeks passed into months, and Kate proved something that many of the instructors had not expected. She was not exceptional in any one way, but she was competent in every way. She could carry out orders. She could think quickly. She could work with others, even when those others were species that had never seen a human before and had to overcome their own prejudices. Admiral Vex watched her progress from a distance. He made notes on his datapad and said nothing to anyone about what he was thinking. But something in the human girl intrigued him. She had a quality that he could not quite quantify. It was not strength, and it was not speed. It was something quieter and more dangerous. By the end of the first year, Kate Mitchell had become known to the other recruits, not as a curiosity, but as someone to be reckoned with, not liked exactly by everyone, but respected, and respect in the Coalition Academy was worth more than friendship. Maya told her one evening, as they sat in the common area, that the other humans were proud of her, that she was showing the galaxy what humans could become. Kate smiled and said nothing because she was already thinking about what would happen when someone decided to really test her. Krell was a Krillian officer who carried his superiority like a weapon and wore his chitinous armor like a crown. He had been born into a military family on a world known for producing the most disciplined and feared fighters in the Coalition. His exoskeleton shimmered with an iridescent blue sheen that deepened to black along his edges. His natural weapons included claws that could tear through steel and mandibles that could crush bone with minimal effort. He had watched Kate Mitchell for months and found her presence in the academy irritating. At first, he had found her amusing, a fragile thing from a backwater Deathworld, trying to compete with species that had evolved for combat and conquest. But as the months turned into a year and Kate continued to prove herself in simulations and tactical exercises, Krell realized that his amusement was turning into something else. Annoyance, perhaps, or worse, concern. The problem was that Krell had certain expectations about the natural order of the universe. The Krillians were superior. The Vorath were strong. The Sithari were graceful, and humans were supposed to be fragile curiosities that belonged in academic study, not in military service. Yet here was Kate Mitchell holding her own, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. One afternoon, Krell positioned himself in the common area where he knew Kate would appear for her afternoon meal. He had strategically gathered his closest friends around him, creating an audience for what he was about to do. He had his armor polished to a high shine, and his posture was one of absolute confidence. When Kate walked in, Krell stood up and moved to intercept her. The entire room seemed to quiet, as if somehow everyone could sense that something was about to happen. Kate Mitchell, he said loud enough for everyone in the common area to hear his chittering accent, making her name sound almost like an insult. You have been training here for a year now, and I have watched you try to keep up with the rest of us. It is almost impressive how hard you work to compensate for your weakness. Kate paused and looked at him calmly. She had learned months ago that showing emotion was often seen as a weakness by the other species. So, she kept her expression neutral and waited. Your entire species comes from a world that should have produced nothing but prey animals. His mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter. Yet here you are walking among warriors and pretending that you belong. Perhaps it is time that we had a demonstration of where humans truly stand in the hierarchy of galactic strength. He paused, and his claws extended, slightly scraping against the floor with a sound like metal on stone. I challenge you to combat in the arena tomorrow at midday. It will be a good lesson for everyone here to understand the natural limitations of your kind. You can accept or you can prove that humans are cowards as well as weak. The room erupted in chatter. The other Krillians began clicking and chittering in what Kate had learned to recognize as approval. Her fellow humans looked worried. Maya appeared in the doorway of the common area with an expression of concern Kate should have refused. She knew that accepting was tactically foolish. She knew that Krell was bigger, stronger, and possessed natural weapons that she did not. She knew that the odds were entirely against her. But then Krell continued speaking, and everything shifted. Your planet is supposedly so harsh that it forced your evolution, but that is nothing compared to real danger, nothing compared to the threats that exist in this galaxy. Your evolution on that Deathworld means nothing when measured against Krillian superiority. Something cold and clear moved through Kate at those words. It was the same feeling she had experienced hunting with her father on Earth when they were tracking an animal that had been threatening the settlement. It was the feeling that came right before the action began, right before survival became all that mattered. I accept, she said quietly. Her voice did not rise, but it cut through the noise of the room like a blade. Krell made a sound of satisfaction and turned away, assuming the matter was settled. He did not see the way Kate stood motionless for a moment, her hands at her sides, her eyes focused on a point that seemed very far away. I rushed to her as soon as Krell left the room. What were you thinking, Kate? You cannot win this fight, I know. Kate said simply then, why did you accept? Because he needed to understand something. But what if you lose? Kate looked at her friend, and for a moment something flickered across her expression like a predator's shadow passing over water. I do not lose things that matter. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. For the humans it was filled with worry and doubt. Many advised Kate to withdraw from the challenge, to claim an injury or some other excuse. The Krillians and other species seemed to view the challenge with entertainment, as if they were all simply waiting for the inevitable demonstration of human inferiority. Kate spent the evening in her quarters alone. She did not meditate or perform any special preparation. She did not study recordings of Krell in combat. She simply sat quietly and thought about the important lessons that Earth had taught her. She thought about the time she was 12 years old, and a predator had come near the settlement. It was larger and faster than any human. It had claws and teeth and instincts, honed across millions of years of evolution. Yet the humans had survived because they did something that the creature did not expect. They had planned, they had communicated, they had understood weakness and vulnerability, even in something so much more physically powerful. The night before the match, Kate slept deeply and without dreams. She woke refreshed and calm as she put on the combat uniform that had been provided for the match. She thought about her parents. She thought about the red dust of Earth and the way the sky looked during sunset. She thought about everything she was fighting for, everything she had come to this distant station to prove when she entered the arena the next day. The entire station seemed to be gathered in the observation areas. Hundreds of eyes looked down at her. Some held curiosity, some held doubt. A few held something that might have been hope. Krell was already in the arena, looking confident and pleased with himself. He had his armor shined and his weapons ready. He took his position and looked at Kate as if she were already defeated. Match was about to begin, and Kate Mitchell was about to teach a lesson that no one in that arena would ever forget. The referee was a Zanari judge who had officiated hundreds of matches. The call came for the match to begin, and Krell moved forward with the confident stride of a predator who has never encountered anything that could truly threaten him. His claws extended, and his mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or might have been a threat. Kate simply stood with her hands open and her posture relaxed. Crowd expected a quick fight. They expected Kate to attempt something desperate or foolish and to be quickly dispatched. They expected to see the natural order of the universe confirmed in this arena between two fighters of vastly different abilities. Krell threw his first attack with controlled strength. He was not trying to seriously harm Kate, not yet. That would come after he had toyed with her for a bit. He wanted to feel her struggle. He wanted to hear the crowd laugh at her desperation. He wanted the lesson to be complete. Kate moved aside with a grace that surprised everyone, including herself. She did not dodge at the last second when panic had forced the movement. Instead, she had seen the strike coming from the moment. Krell had shifted his weight to prepare it, and she had simply moved out of the way before the blow arrived. Krell paused and looked at her with something that might have been confusion. He attacked again and again, this time with more force and more precision. Kate continued to move. She did not attack Krell. She did not try to strike him with the limited weapons she possessed. She simply watched and moved and breathed. Crowd began to murmur. The match was not proceeding as expected. Come on, he said, his clicking mandibles indicating frustration. Why do you not fight back? Are you truly so much of a coward that you can only run? Kate said nothing. She continued to move around him. Her breathing remained steady and controlled. Each time she moved, she learned something new about Krell, about the way his armor restricted certain movements, about the way his size meant he needed more time to change direction, about the way his confidence was making him careless. Another strike came, and this time Kate understood the pattern. Krell was right-handed in a way that his species expressed. His claws on his dominant side were slightly larger, and he favored them for attacking. His left side had more heavy armor, but less precision. His legs were heavily muscled, but had limited flexibility in certain directions. She was learning him like a map, like a weapon, like prey. Krell was beginning to understand that something was wrong with this fight. The human was not fighting back, but she was not being defeated either. She was moving with purpose and precision, and she was making him work harder than he had ever worked in any training match. The cool detachment on her face was beginning to worry him. Stop running, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. I will end this quickly if you simply stand and fight. Kate looked at him then, and Krell saw something in her eyes that made his chitinous armor feel suddenly inadequate. She had stopped thinking about this as a competition. She had stopped treating him as an opponent. Something had shifted in her, and she was no longer in this arena. He was no longer a skilled Krellian officer with superior training and natural weapons. He was prey. A realization hit Krell like a physical blow, and for the first time in his life, he understood what fear felt like. The crowd was silent now. The crowd that had come expecting entertainment and confirmation of their prejudices was suddenly witnessing something that made their assumptions seem naive. Kate moved toward Krell with a speed and focus that seemed impossible for a human. She was not trying to overpower him anymore. She was not trying to match his strength or his armor or his weapons. She was hunting her. First real attack came like a question, and then a statement. She moved inside his guard faster than his eyes could follow. Her fist struck the junction between two pieces of his armor, where the protection ended and vulnerability began. Pain exploded through Krell, and for the first time in the match, he made a sound. That was not confidence or superiority, but surprise and hurt. The crowd gasped. Everyone could see now that something fundamental had changed in the match. Krell tried to counter, but Kate was no longer where she had been. She was already moving, already positioning herself for the next strike, already understanding that she had moved from being tested to being the one who would do the testing strike. After strike, Kate found the weak points in his armor, the places where the exoskeleton had joints. The places where armor did not cover. The places that experience and observation had revealed to her in those long minutes of moving and watching and understanding. Krell fought back with desperation. Now his earlier confidence replaced by the desperate movements of something that realized it was losing. The crowd watches in shocked silence as the human began to demonstrate something that none of them had understood about what humans truly were: not fragile, not weak, not incapable, but strategic and focused and adaptable in ways that only came from surviving worlds where hesitation meant death, where any mistake brought consequences that were final and absolute. Krell fell to one knee, his armor damaged in several places, his breathing labored. His mandibles hung open, and for the first time he looked at Kate not with contempt, but with something that looked like recognition. The recognition of a creature who had made a terrible mistake. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Kate stood above him, not exhausted, but simply still. Her breathing was controlled, and even her hands were steady. Her expression was completely calm, and that calm was more terrifying than anger could ever. The referee made the call. Match over. The human is the human, is the victor. The arena erupted in shocked noise. Some voices expressed outrage that their assumptions had been wrong. Other voices expressed wonder at what they had just witnessed. But above all was the sound of fear, because they had just learned that the fragile creatures from the Deathworld were perhaps not fragile at all, and Kate Mitchell stood in the center of that arena with blood that was not hers on her hands, understanding that everything had changed in this moment, that the galaxy would never see humans or her in the same way again. But the match was not yet over, and Krell was trying to rise, though he was clearly injured and weakened. He pushed himself up with 3 of his 4 arms, his left side no longer responding properly to his commands. His eyes were still on Kate, and they held a desperate determination to not be completely defeated by something he had so thoroughly underestimated. Kate watched him stand, and there was a moment where she could have allowed him to concede. She could have walked away, declared victory, and left him with his life and his honor intact. But Krell had done something that changed the calculation. He had not simply challenged her. He had questioned the value of her entire species. He had suggested that humans belonged in zoos. He had decided that her birthright and her strength and her very existence was something to be mocked. So Kate did not back away. She moved forward with the efficiency of someone executing a plan that had been set in motion long before this fight had begun. She understood that Krell would try to use his remaining arm to block her strikes. She knew that his left side was compromised and that he would be unable to dodge with his full range of motion. She recognized that his armor was damaged enough. Now that certain areas that had been protected were now exposed to direct assault, the second phase of the match was nothing like the first. There was no longer any pretense of a fair fight between competitors. Krell was trying to survive, and Kate was ensuring that he would understand the price of his arrogance. Her strikes came with increasing precision, each one targeted by knowledge rather than chance, each one aimed at maximum effect and minimum mercy. She moved around him, not allowing him any rest, not allowing him any moment to think or plan or hope for a reversal. She was a force of nature, shaped by a world that did not forgive. Weakness. Krell tried to grab her at one point, using his remaining good arm to attempt to capture her and hold her long enough to use his claws. But Kate turned his own momentum against him, using the weight and strength he had been so proud of. She put him onto the ground with a force that drove the air from his lungs. He could not rise again. Krell lay on the arena floor, gasping and bleeding and broken. His armor bore the marks of the fight. His body bore the wounds of his collision with a predator that had learned to hunt in one of the harshest environments ever produced. The crowd was completely silent. The Krillians, who had come to watch one of their finest warriors prove the obvious superiority of their kind, were now watching that warrior be taught a lesson in absolute humiliation. Kate stood above him, breathing heavily for the first time in the match. Her uniform was torn, and there was blood on her arms, both hers and his. But her eyes were cold and clear, and when she looked down at Krell, there was no mercy in that gaze. You questioned whether humans belong in the military. You questioned our strength. You questioned our right to stand among the species of this galaxy. And you did all of this from a position of absolute ignorance about what you truly were facing. Krell looked up at her, and his mandibles quivered. My world is not soft, she continued, and her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the arena. Every corner of Earth teaches a lesson to those born there that you could never understand. Predators hunt us, and we survive. Environments try to kill us, and we persist. Weather and disease and hunger and pain are part of every day of our lives. The weak do not last long on Earth, and those who do last learn to be something other than what you call weak. She paused, and when she continued, there was something almost like sadness in her voice. We are not better than you because we are stronger or faster or more naturally gifted. We are simply better because we refuse to die. We refuse to accept that anything is impossible, and we refuse to believe that our limits are anything more than suggestions to be overcome. Humans are from a death world, because our world forces us to become weapons against the universe itself. We do not have armor that we are born with, so we developed discipline. We do not have natural claws, so we developed technique. We do not have the strength of the Varath, so we develop strategy and patience, and the ability to wait for the moment. When our opponent believes he has won, Krell said nothing. He simply lay there, understanding in a way that he had never understood before that he had made a terrible mistake in assuming that physical superiority was the only measure of worth that mattered. Kate turned away from him and looked up at the crowd, at the thousands of eyes watching her from the observation areas. This is what it means to come from the death world. This is what it means to be human. We are not fragile. We are not weak. We are not inferior to any species in this galaxy. We are simply different, and our difference comes from the fact that we have survived the unsurvivable. Crowd erupted in noise, but it was not the noise of mockery or laughter. It was the noise of beings who had just witnessed something that had overturned their assumptions about the natural order of things. The noise of beings who had just learned that they had been dangerously wrong. Medical teams rushed into the arena to assist Krell. They would heal him in time. The Krillian physiology was resilient enough that even the injuries he had sustained would not be permanent. But his pride, his sense of superiority, and his confidence would take much longer to repair. Kate was escorted from the arena. Maya was waiting for her at the entrance. Her eyes were wide, and her hand covered her mouth. But behind the shock, there was something that looked like pride. Something that looked like vindication of everything they had fought so hard to prove about their species. You were incredible, she said when Kate reached her. You were absolutely incredible. Kate did not feel incredible. She felt tired and sore, and something else, something that was harder to name. Perhaps it was the feeling of having crossed a threshold, knowing that she could never go back to being what she had been before this moment. Perhaps it was the understanding that she had done what she came here to do, but that doing it had changed her fundamentally. The aftermath of the match spread through the station like a wave. The images were shared across coalition networks and transmitted back to human colonies on other worlds. The story of the Deathworld girl who had defeated a Krillian officer became legend almost immediately within hours. Every species in the station was discussing it, and every opinion about humans was being reassessed in the light of this new information. Krell requested a transfer 3 days later. His request was approved. Without comment, he did not wish to remain on the same station as Kate Mitchell. The shame of his defeat was almost bearable, but the fact that he would see her in the corridors and the common areas made it impossible for him to maintain any sense of dignity. He would leave the station and attempt to rebuild his reputation elsewhere, perhaps hoping that distance would allow him to forget the lessons that Kate had taught him so thoroughly. The other human trainees were treating Kate differently. Now they were no longer uncertain about whether they belonged. There was a new confidence in them, a new understanding that perhaps the humans from Earth had something valuable to offer, something that the other species could not easily dismiss or overlook. The fact that one of them had proven capable of defeating one of the most feared species in the coalition gave them all a sense of pride that had not existed before. Admiral Vex summoned Kate to his office 5 days after the match. She entered with the same calm that she had brought to the arena. He was waiting for her behind a large desk that was too perfectly organized to belong to anyone who actually worked much. He gestured for her to sit, and Kate did. "You have caused quite a disturbance," he said, and his tone was difficult to read. "I accepted a challenge," she replied simply. "Yes, you did. And you won in a manner that has left everyone from here to the core worlds discussing what it means to be human. I have received 17 reports from various species asking if all humans are capable of what you demonstrated. That is a problem." Kate said nothing, waiting to understand what the Admiral wanted from her. "It is a problem because the coalition has suddenly developed a new respect and possibly a new fear of your species, and we need to channel that properly. We need to demonstrate that humans are not simply warriors, but something more valuable." He paused, and for the first time, his expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "I am offering you the opportunity to lead a new Division A special operations unit composed of the elite soldiers from every species in the coalition. The Varath, who are strong, the Sithari, who are graceful, the Zanari, who are clever, the Krillians, who have discipline even when that discipline is sometimes blinded by arrogance, and the humans, who apparently have something that all the others lack." Kate considered this. She understood that this was not really an offer in the traditional sense. It was an assignment presented as an opportunity. She also understood that this was exactly what she had been working toward from the moment she had decided to come to this station. "I will do it," she said. "Of course you will," Admiral Vex replied, and he smiled, which transformed his face into something that looked almost genuinely pleased. "You will begin training your unit next week. You will have access to any resources you request, and you will be given command authority over every member of your division, regardless of their species, their rank, or their prejudices. Your only limitation is that you cannot use your position to seek revenge against any specific individual. That is a limitation I wanted to make clear." Kate understood that this was a reference to Krell, though his name was not mentioned. She nodded her agreement. That evening, Kate stood on the observation deck of the station, looking out at the stars beyond. Earth was somewhere out there, a distant red dot that she could not actually resolve in the darkness, but she knew where it was. She carried it inside her, the knowledge of home and what it had taught her. Maya found her there as the evening deepened. She had begun to look for Kate in this location, knowing that the observation deck was where she always went when she needed to think. "You did it," she said, coming to stand beside Kate. "You actually did it." Did what Kate asked, though she knew what Maya meant. "You proved that we belong here. You showed them what humanity really is. You changed everything." Kate was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars and thinking about the price of that change. "I did what needed to be done," she said finally. "That is all I ever intended to do. But now you are going to command a unit composed of the best soldiers from every species in the coalition," Maya continued, and there was wonder in her voice. "That is amazing, Kate. You're going to change the entire military structure of the coalition." Kate thought about this. She thought about the weight of responsibility that came with being the first human in a position of real power. She thought about the fact that her actions had now become representative of her entire species. She thought about the future and all the ways that it had become more complicated since the day she had arrived on this station on Earth. "When you survive a threat, you do not celebrate," she said to Maya. "You acknowledge what happened, and then you prepare for the next threat. Because survival is never truly guaranteed, and the moment you believe that it is the moment when something new and more dangerous emerges to remind you of your vulnerability." Maya smiled, because she was beginning to understand that this was what Earth had taught them. This was the gift and the curse of coming from a death world. The understanding that peace and victory were temporary states and that preparation and vigilance were the only things that could ever be relied upon. But she also understood that this was exactly why humans needed to be part of the greater galaxy, why humans needed to stand in positions of power and influence, because the other species needed to learn what the death world had already taught, that survival is not a luxury. It is a fundamental quality of being human, and mercy and compassion are choices that survivors make because they understand the cost of not making them. As the night deepened and the stars grew brighter, Kate Mitchell stood on the observation deck of a coalition station orbiting a neutral world, knowing that she had accomplished what she came here to do, but also knowing that this was only the beginning. She had picked a fight and she had ended it mercilessly. But in doing so, she had begun something far larger, something that would change the way that the entire coalition viewed humans, something that would prove that the creatures from the death world were not fragile or weak, but something far more dangerous, far more valuable, and far more essential to the future than anyone had ever imagined. The universe was about to learn what it truly meant to encounter a species that had evolved under the harsh, unforgiving tutelage of a death world. And the universe would never be quite. the same again.